I feel I have the potential to write history and I want to pursue it.
To build a successful business, you must start small but dream big.
We kick things off with a man who put his best foot forward.
Let's give your attention to Michel Scholte.
Michel Scholte.
And when they open their economics book, they will read about true price.
Michel, one of the things you committed is developing true pricing. What is true pricing?
Prices that represent better the costs that underlie the production and consumption of products. I feel like I'm failing a lot on many dimensions. I was 17. I asked my mother, why are we poor? And she said, we are not poor. Look around you. There's so many people who are poor. We are actually doing okay. Stop whining.
Why do you break it down to luck and not nature versus nurture?
I don't think it's fair that I got this chance and they don't. You can speak of those who are in extreme forms of poverty. We should shut the F up about it and just make sure that we pay our fair share. I'm very afraid that, with all our good intentions, we can pave the way to negative outcomes and have a Oppenheimer moment.
Destroyer of worlds.
Michel.
Yeah.
I find it important to start all of my podcasts with the same question because it sets a certain tone for the rest of the conversation. And that question is, are you happy?
I'm hungry for improvement and satisfied, but overall happy.
Do you believe that we should chase happiness?
To an extent, I think depending how you define happiness, I think hedonism could be one interpretation. I don't think that's the pursuit of life. I think if you would look into what is, the kind of psychoanalytical thinking around happiness, I would argue that, a kind of transcendence, something that transcends your own interest is a very, virtuous definition of happiness. And I think that's something we ought to pursue. Mm-hmm. And, that could be, for example, relieving the suffering of people in the world, addressing crises that you see around you, poverty crisis, inequality crisis, hunger, climate change, biodiversity, collapse. These are examples of things I think if you pursue those, then, I think that is a form of happiness because it transcends your own interest. It transcends the kind of era in which you live. And I think that is a very virtuous life, and it is something that can contribute to life satisfaction. But it is not necessarily the hedonistic interpretation, which is much more about maximizing the interest of yourself or kind of pursuing certain material goals. Mm-hmm.
It's a nice segue to the question that I usually ask afterwards, which is, for this particular podcast, I have a research hypothesis that passion equals purpose.
Clear.
What is your thoughts on that?
Could you explain that a little bit, just to be sure?
Backstory. Before I started this podcast, I was a DJ and producer, and I loved music. I loved performing. But what I realized at the time, as I reached sort of this crossroads of finishing my master, that either I had to decide now I was going to go all in, or I was going to try something else. And the going all in part was really focused on chasing my passion in that sense. And what I noticed in myself was that I lacked the self-belief in order to chase my passion. And I didn't think I could compete with all the other talent that was already out there. Yeah. And so this, knowing though how chasing my passion made me feel like amazing. If I look back on the music, I would never qualify it as a waste of time or whatever. Yeah. But knowing how that made me feel made me question, okay, if I cannot pursue that, what am I then going to do? Yeah. Hence sort of this quarter life crisis point. But more specifically, should we chase our passions? And if so, why? Does passion equal purpose?
Clear. I think if you're lucky, this could apply to you, that you can find purpose in your passion, or that you can kind of bring the two together, that you can kind of pursue the things that also make you kind of, passionate. that fires up your passion. I think it's a luxury, and I think it's not, unfortunately, applicable to the majority of people right now, but also in historic terms, far from possible. And I wouldn't say that they have necessarily unpurposeful lives, but it may be like less passionate. Yeah, it's sad, obviously, that lives live with less passion, but I think it's a reality for many people. I think there's also obviously different dimensions to purpose. I think, many people actually luckily have lots of purpose from the relations with others, with their loved ones, with their family, with their children, with their spouse, with their friends. And I think that is much more widely kind of present, and, that is very purposeful, despite perhaps a lacking passion, and then I think also what do we mean with passion oftentimes, and I think in modern day society it's kind of this activity or professional endeavor, or like something that could be a professional endeavor that may even generate some income,
I was listening to an interview with Simon Sinek where he said something very similar, that the reason why so many people, including myself, struggle to find their purpose is due to the fact that we've become less or because we go to the church less. People have become less religious. And what he says is that back in the day, people found their purpose by being part of a community, going to church regularly. And as that has digressed, what we have done to compensate that lack of purpose, what people in the past used to have from going to church, is look for it in our job. Hence, where people like me come in and look for one job that has all the marks. How, in that case, let me ask, do you have a passion? And if so, how would you describe passion for you?
Well, let me just, before I dive into that, respond to what apparently Simon Sinek is saying about religion and kind of professional endeavors, or kind of, organizational affiliations, if in a kind of abstract term, but like you pursue and does he say then that people are kind of alienated or disappointed in the pursuit for some sort of religious pursuit in the kind of professional context?
I believe what he said was that it's more that because this purpose element is missing from going to church and etc., that they look for a way to compensate that, and often the go-to is then work.
I would say there's this scholar Stephen Young. He's a Harvard, I think, affiliate, and he's also active in the kind of co-roundtable. It's kind of a roundtable of key decision makers globally, and he's part of an advisory board of one of my foundations. And he said we need to bring back prophecy into profession, and that is kind of the prophetic. It's kind of the, and then there's a very interesting thing that you see in many religions, that is kind of this acceptance of the transcendental, or kind of the metaphysical, that the thing that is not necessarily observable, that's not necessarily material, but is nonetheless there, is nonetheless true. And, that could, that one of the elements to that is that you just do things because it's inherently valuable, even if you wouldn't be able to falsify that, to kind of make some sort of experiment and to observe that, then still it may be there. And that is something I would say it is something that can make people excited or passionate, is that it's because I want to pursue a certain instrumental gain, or a certain financial gain or material gain. I do it just because it's something I want to do, because it's inherently important. I think that's something that indeed is oftentimes lacking in the professional context, because, well, we've seen a narrow and relentless, unfortunately, pursuit of financial goals and of instrumental goals, selling as many products, right? There's even, I would say, this ontology, the learning of being, that I would describe as I am because I buy. It's omnipresent, the pursuit of stuff, and it's constantly pushed into you. And in the professional endeavor, many of the professions are actually primarily designed to sell stuff, to produce stuff, to sell stuff, to make as efficient as possible the buying of things or of food, and oftentimes food that is denigrated to the most efficient, hyper-processed version of food, rather than some sort of, and that is in contrast of, and that is, I would say, something that's missing, and that's the prophecy that is potentially in organizations and in profession, rather than kind of this this pursuit of a higher good, of the perseverance of future generations. They are not visible. It's kind of an abstract idea that the children of the children that we cherish have a livable future, or that people outside of our networks that we don't even know, that they still have some justice, that we respect and protect their justice, their minimal call it rights that you can, for example, consider being free from exploitation, having protected gear against toxins, or there's so many things that you could pursue that are not necessarily instrumental, but are just the right thing to do, or just are important, and that has some sort of prophetic some sort of prophecy to it. And I do think that is unfortunately lacking in professions, and I think we need to bring that back. And if we bring that back, I don't think that then there's not necessarily an alienation. What Max Weber, he is a famous social scientist, and he's no longer alive, but he was reflecting on the modernization of organizations, and he had a lot of critique on bureaucracies. And he would say that the kind of the hyper version of a bureaucracy and the kind of the challenge that represents is called bureaucratism. Right, it's kind of the too much of it, and that could lead to alienation. And he calls this, I think it's said, der Entzauberung der Welt. It's like when you're alienated from your world, and this is where people get lost and they feel alienated. They get soul searching, and I think that is because they lose the purpose. They lose the kind of the higher pursuit that they can identify with, that they can consider part of themselves. And I think that's inherently human. We see that from many anthropological studies, that human societies and individuals are flourishing in a context where they have some sort of pursuit that is maybe transcendental, or is not necessarily instrumental.
It's very interesting because it touches on something that I'm realizing lately, and I did some research on the origin of the word passion, which is obviously the foundation of what I research. And it turns out the word passion literally means to suffer. Yeah. Whereas a lot of people assume chasing my passion is sunshine and rainbows, when in reality, you have to be willing to bleed for this particular thing that you are trying to achieve. And when you talk about the distinction between the Entzauberung, the distinction between or alienation from the other humans, it correlates to this chasing your passion of, if you're wanting to make significant change in the world, you have to be willing to alienate yourself from the majority of the people. Am I summarizing that correctly?
This pursuit of something that transcends yourself or material gains, a higher good. I think that's a virtuous pursuit, and that could, in a way, lead to some sort of sacrifice of your own interest. In this, at the same time, I think that is, it could be something that is actually good. And I like. There's another psychoanalytical figure, Erich Fromm, and he has written The Art of Loving, one of his it's one of the most read books on love in the first place, and it's also for him, it's a very influential work. And what I really like about him, it touches upon the question: should you care for yourself? Is that kind of part of loving? And if I would kind of diminish my own interest, isn't that at the interest of others? Isn't that the most ultimate form of love? And the answer that he gives is no, it's not, because yourself is similar or kind of equal to all others. You have to also care for yourself. Not necessarily because you are some sort of superior being, but it's because you are similar to all the others. And therefore, because you have this universal brotherhood, this kind of pursuit of the, kind of knowing others, caring for others, taking responsibility for others, because you do that for others, you should also do that for yourself. Not because you are some sort of superior or inferior being, but because it's a universal mindset. And I would say in what you're touching upon, like, should you self-sacrifice or should you somehow diminish your own interest? I wouldn't necessarily say that you kind of then have to be in alienation of others or, have some sort of heavy burden. I would say you want to balance the interest of yourself and making sure you're healthy, that you indeed are purposeful, that you choose some sort of path that resonates with your talents or with your natural, needs and aspirations. And at the same time, optimize the pursuit of the interest of others. And I think that is the ultimate fulfillment. Right. And I think that is also present in many of the kind of scriptures that Abrahamic religions, such as Christianity or Islamic religions, prescribe, right? That you kind of balance the interest of others with your own interest, and then and that's also kind of more societal, right? The interest of the group with your own interest. It's all about balancing that.
It's fascinating because I was actually talking with Elliot about it yesterday, that currently I'm in a process of really prioritizing my health at a new stage in my life, where I've come to realize, and that's touches on the love part that you just spoke about, that everything else in my life, whether that's my business, my relationships, my child, my whatever, is all dependent upon me being in a healthy enough way to really take care of them. So indeed, in order to make that progress, your love for yourself or health, however you translate that, has to be at the center of the things you do.
True. Yeah, I agree. And
beautiful.
It's oftentimes overlooked, I suppose.
That being said, is there something that you would describe as your passion?
I'm a general passionate person, I suppose. Relative to others, I'm more intense when whatever I'm exposed to compared to others in general. I try to see the beauty and the craft, or the kind of what is the art, perhaps, in the things that are around me, and I need to be even selective of what I, try to dive into deeper versus, because otherwise you get so distracted. But I have a general kind of passion for activities. And I also see it as a gift that I am alive in the first place, and that I am healthy at this moment, and that I can, pursue anything in a way. Oh, yeah, I think actually there's no limitation to what you at least try to pursue. I'm not saying that you can be successful in anything, but at least you can pursue anything. And I have the luxury to have quite a broad scope of opportunities. I'm very resourceful. So I would say I'm passionate, and I've chosen, entrepreneurship as my kind of umbrella. I love to take an entrepreneurial position. What do I consider kind of entrepreneurial is kind of having at least effort to organize towards a certain outcome with others, and then having some sort of business model that kind of regenerate that outcome and can sustain that.
Yeah.
And, not necessarily well, I think growth is a precondition, but you can also consider it like flourishing, or let it kind of, have some sort of regenerative foundation in a way.
Yeah.
And that is my passion. So entrepreneurship, and then impact entrepreneurship. I would add that concept because I also am passionate about pursuing positive contributions to the life satisfaction of others on different levels, whether it's direct, whether it's indirect, whether it's now, whether it's in the future, whether it's here, whether it's somewhere else. I really, find it gives me a good thrill to have some sort of contribution to the well-being of others.
Where did that passion originate from?
You mean in general, or for me in particular?
For you in particular.
Yeah, it's a good question. And, I've a narrative, but it's not necessarily probably the only answer. But if I would say what drove me to, and obviously I can describe it pretty in abstract terms.
Yeah.
And that's because I thought about it. I think about it a lot. I think like I have in my life seen different sides of society. And I think in my personal kind of upbringing, my mother was a self-made journalist, didn't have a lot of money in Dutch terms. She was relatively poor. I can say that. My auntie used to say she didn't have a nail to scratch her butt.
Yeah.
This is kind of a Dutch saying, relatively direct, but we relied on donations of clothing. I know when you don't have much money, things that are very precious are underwear with elastics. It's never there, or without holes. Socks are super precious. If you don't have money, there's always holes in socks, and they're never in the right size, and they also never match. These types of things, I know it by experience. And I also know how subtle the rejection is if you do not fulfill these material codes. You don't get access to the richer neighborhoods. Not necessarily literally you're blocked. In many parts of the world, it's for sure not letting people in the gated communities. But in the Netherlands, it's more like they look down on you. They take an extra round with their kind of security community, like the neighborhood guards. If you enter a store, you have to empty your pockets. If I went for, we didn't really go into stores, but if I would go there, it's a very intimidating place because you cannot buy anything. You feel super intimidated by all the prices you see on the shelves. And you have to empty your pockets because you look like a beggar. You look like someone that they don't trust. And it's normalized. And people think they do the good thing by pointing out that you may have stolen something. The market, and that's more omnipresent than ever, where, your access is determined by the money you have in your pockets, is in a way not very kind for people who don't have much money. And I think I've been exposed to that. And that has given me some sort of maybe some anger to these people. When you're a paper boy trying to get money and you see these rich families in large houses and you get 2 cents for a paper and it's super cold and you don't feel really kind of the recognition. There's some anger, and I think I overcame that. But there's also some empathy with those people in the world that have these situations, the more subtle social exclusion that I've experienced firsthand. It also gave me some sort of understanding, that life is hard and it really, the access can be generated through hard work. I've seen how just by the accumulation of knowledge and by just, climbing the ladder that is present in systems, education system, professional systems, you can actually elevate out of that situation in a way. And I've never identified with the formal roles in the professional kind of context. My father is a truck driver. My mother is like a journalist who didn't necessarily at the beginnings at least fit in, a freelancer. So you don't feel you don't identify with a traineeship at a multinational or at the government. That's not something that I identified with. I thought it was actually pretty, distant from what I pursued. I always felt I wouldn't be accepted in the first place. I wouldn't meet their standards. I don't speak their language. But I also thought, like, really, do we really have to, bend into these harnesses of whatever clothing you have to wear, or whatever, professional demeanor that you have to conform to? I was like, hell no. And I also didn't recognize the outcomes that these systems pursue. For me, it's pretty alienating, the kind of material, gains that they portray, that they kind of promise, or that they pursue. For me, it's not something I think that is virtuous. I don't think it solves a lot of societal's problems. I'd rather focus on, making the economy more inclusive. That we are, how can I kind of counter that? Call it, in my view, it's a alienating and relatively cruel dominant structure that we have seen in markets for the past decades. Yeah. How can we counter that? And how can we make, markets more inclusive? How can we use the power of markets and of business and of, enterprise and technology? How can we use that to solve societal's problems? That was how my thinking and how my narrative is.
Because it's quite interesting, though, then, that you did, however, realize that in order to make significant change, make the impact, you would have to in some way deal with those people that you felt the furthest away from. I feel like another approach typically is to then, I don't associate with these people, and therefore I will not act with them.
Yeah, or you can kind of have resentment, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I've had my fair share of resentment, and I'm probably still an anger in me. I probably can, have lots of psychoanalytical sessions to grasp that and to overcome it even further. But I fundamentally believe that there's this kind of component of randomness also for those people who are in, for whatever reason, in a superior, materially speaking, superior position. Is it their fault? Not fully. Is it their choice to have a certain prejudice? Not fully, right? To an extent, I think there is, and I think there's proportionally more responsibility, the ability to respond, for those people in resourceful positions. But I don't kind of blame them fully for their, call it, cruelty in a way. And I even would go one step further. I would say there's no one without any influence on the cruelty in the world. I think I myself, I'm super cruel in the decisions that I make. My purchase decisions lead to a lot of destruction. I make even sometimes rational choices that kind of sacrifice certain outcomes because I know, with a certain smartphone, even though I can fairly assume that many components there have been, probably sourced through maybe, at least pollution, but even some sort of
unethical,
of exploitation on the side of workers, then I still make that rational choice because I think, I can use that to alleviate that suffering. So I think there's a universal cruelty in all of us. And I don't think, the marginal differences in a way legitimize myself to judge or to be kind of inherently disrespectful to others, even though I may be on sometimes the suffering side or sometimes, the more oppression side. I think all of us are struggling. And I think there's this kind of, I think it's virtuous to, given that kind of marginal differences in virtuousness, to actually constantly pursue a more virtuous, being, and to always try to make the world better and acknowledge that, I'm just trying. Yeah. I'm far from perfect. You can also consider me very cruel. Yeah. And just kind of assume a certain, that some people try.
I'm quite curious, being at the level that you are at by now, working with the companies that you work with, and the change you're trying to implement, the sort of following that you're also accumulating very rapidly. Do you ever struggle with imposter syndrome?
It's an interesting question. And I think also, what do we really mean with imposter syndrome, right? Maybe you can explain what you mean. I have my
understanding of it is a feeling as if you don't belong. For example, again, we recorded a short video beforehand that I said I'm meeting with you today, but I, in all honesty, have no clue on half of the stuff that I expect we're going to talk about. So what makes me feel, and in that moment, my first instinct is like, what am I doing? Like, how can I talk to you, right? So I guess I do it nonetheless, but the situation of feeling like I don't deserve to be there, I guess.
Yeah. There is a constant, like I wouldn't go into the kind of this relatively shallow, not that you're giving a shallow interpretation of the imposter syndrome. It's like, I maybe unmask and then they see that I am not capable. And therefore there's a constant fear and I need to uphold appearances, and my kind of identity exists almost of upholding appearances. I don't think I have such a thing. I think I try to stick very close to my natural intuitions and kind of, stick with that. And I don't feel this need to necessarily, fit in the first place. What I do feel is this, this duty to, I feel a duty thanks to the opportunities that are miraculously given to me. I feel that the talents that I have miraculously been given give me the duty to help others in whatever way. And I think, is that the imposter syndrome is like, I feel a responsibility because I have a luck. And I think the lottery was won through my brain that I was given through the DNA that, was accumulated in the generations before me. I think that is the biggest lottery, the physiological composition of my body and the health. I think that's the biggest, lottery that I won.
Why do you break it down to luck and not...
Well, because you
sort of the nature versus nurture question.
We can touch, but I was just responding to the kind of imposter syndrome question because, in a way, I feel that I shouldn't not that necessarily that I shouldn't have won that lottery, but it's more like I know that it is very, very rare to have. And there's many more people that have the same and even more luck and more. But I think it's very rare that I have that, and I feel like that gives this duty, like Spider-Man says, with great power, or in this case with great genes and with great ability, with lots of resources comes also the responsibility. And I like the concept of responsibility. Again, is like I am able to respond and therefore I should. So there's kind of some sort of duty. So it's not necessarily, it's kind of, why do I link that to imposter syndrome? Because I feel it's in a way unfair to all of those that don't have it in a way, or those people who suffer. And they may suffer for generations. Yeah. They may be exploited for generations. I don't think it's fair that I got this chance and they don't. And that's something that's instilled in me. And this is also something that drives me, even when I feel tired or when I feel exhausted of just the work that I'm doing. I don't step into some sort of I'm such a victim or whatever. No, I feel like I can quickly put the button towards, no, look, I have such a luck and I have this opportunity to, express myself and use my talents for the good. The question on nature nurture is a very hard question, and you can have endless philosophical debates. And I find it very funny with people, and that I don't identify with this stream of thought that says, everything is caused by luck. I don't think that's a useful, at least, and perhaps not even an empirical perspective, but for sure not useful. let's not go into the empirical because that's too complicated. There's so much also philosophers who've we can quote them, but I'm probably not the one that can explain that best. But I don't think it's a useful mentality. Well, first of all, if I would disagree with that notion, then my disagreement is determined. So, it's kind of self-contradicting, like I'm a total asshole and I think everyone that's poor is poor due to their own choices. And I think that because it's determined by faith, that's kind of, very complicated if you take that position to, oppose that type of position. Because ironically, any position is predetermined. It's outside of the control of that person. Due to circumstances beyond my own control, I am a asshole to those who are poor, and I can enrich myself at the expense of all of those. I'm gold on earth. That's what you can easily say to those who, and you see that oftentimes in a more kind of solidarity ID systems, right? It's like we need to care for others because no one can actually, no one has ever chosen to have a certain outcome. It's always beyond their control that they are in a certain level of suffering, right? I don't think it's useful. I don't think it's, I would rather go for, a balanced perspective. Like, it depends on your resources. Are you okay? Would you like some water?
No, but
there's some water.
You want some?
No, I'm okay. Okay. No, I would rather go for a balanced combination. I would say that, there is a beginning of your life. You are put in a certain position. Lots of things are configured for you. And you have in your time span a certain exposure to resources, and you can move in that landscape of options. Yeah. And it's pretty unlikely that if you are born very, very unresourced and in very harsh conditions, or you have genetic, a genetic composition that in that society is just giving you disadvantage. For example, you're not able to process information very quickly. Yeah. You're not able to store information very quickly. You're not able to make certain interpretations of information, whatever kind of neural configuration you may have that's in your disadvantage. It's very unlikely that you quickly, climb the ranks of academia. That may be the institution that could lead you to gain accumulate resources and whatever, have a more successful or more kind of resourceful position within your lifespan. That is my take on it, that it's kind of, but there is a lot, I would say, that you can actually do in any circumstance, on average, especially if you are in a resourceful kind of environment. Yeah.
With this constant feeling of having a duty to take care of those less fortunate, it sounds like it's something that is very hard to find peace. Clear. As in, there's never going to be an end to that. You're essentially, let's say you solve climate change, there's the next one, poverty is next, etc. Do you find the time, first of all, do you consider yourself at peace? And if so, do you find the time to rest, I guess?
I was obviously highlighting a certain part of my mentality and a certain part of what I pursue, and I would say more in a professional sense, because that was the kind of the conversation we were having. It's not like it's not that this is the total definition of what I pursue, or I have a bit more than just that side of me, of that part of my identity. But within that part of my identity, obviously, it will probably be never ending. But I've already kind of, I try to have peace with, I don't want to die. I don't want to kind of age to an extent that I have inevitable health problems. But I know it could happen. It's likely to happen still. And then I would definitely want to have created some sort of legacy. I have very particular definitions of what I want to have achieved in my life. And I've also defined 2100 as the kind of, as a nice point, an anchor point.
Yeah.
When you talk about a quarter life crisis, like I have a realistic approach. I know that I'm, who am I on the scale of things in the world, with all the people, like, what can I bring on the other end? I think all of those who have written history have one thing in common. Well, no, not necessarily, but many of them who have written history have a thing in common. That is that they felt they could write history. And I feel I have the potential to write history and I want to pursue it. And that doesn't mean I will solve suffering, but I will have done everything that was possible within this bundle of energy and conscience, within that kind of field of resources that's possible. And that is for me very fulfilling, and I can feel peace if I have done so. And I feel very existentially lost if I feel I haven't done so, or if I feel I fail or I have failed. That is for me the biggest hit. It just is really an existential. I think it is something that is like threatening, life-threatening for me, because indeed it is something I take very deep and very serious. Yeah. So, but when we talk about quarter life crisis, I like the parallel in kind of the, millennium. We're now 2023, 2025 is kind of, for the next century, we are kind of at the quarter, towards 2100. And I do see a crisis. The crisis is that we struggle with the relation between, let's just narrow it down to money. The relation between money and the pursuit of financial capital and natural, social, and human capital in the kind of economic system. Let's narrow it down to economics, because we can the scope of everything is just too broad. But just for the economic system, I would say we are in potentially a quarter life crisis. We are redefining our relation between nature, society, and human dignity, and kind of that pursuit of finance and financial outcomes. That is very, you call it frightening. There's no new language yet. There's no new norms yet. There's no fit mindset yet. There's no fit system to accommodate that. And we need to build this, and this creates lots of ambiguity. Yeah. But and that's obviously at the backdrop of an ever increasing technological development, ever increasing digitization. And that also creates lots of new challenges, questions around what are we, the being, the ontological questions, but also what is knowledge, epistemological questions. And suddenly, more than ever, we see that all these ID systems are just ID systems. They are relatively it's kind of a construct. It's not objectively true. And we are also confronted by the fact that we haven't actually solved questions around, what happens with us when we die, or what were we before we were alive, there's so many existential questions that are suddenly more, call it, present than ever. And I think that creates a crisis ultimately. No, but maybe I'm stealing a little bit too much the concept of a quarter life crisis.
No, not at all. One of the things you already touched on earlier is the overwhelming opportunity out there to try and find a path which you're on, which, as I explained before we started filming, it was kind of the root of my issue. Yeah. Do you have any advice when it comes to sort of standing at that crossroads and seeing, I could go this way, I could go that way, I could go this way? How do you make that choice?
Could you elaborate on the root of your issue?
So for me, it was losing my passion in music, knowing from my first job experience that I didn't want to work just for someone in a 9-to-5, but not having a clue what I did want to work for then. Or at the very least, knowing that if I did something, I had to feel passionate about the topic. Yeah. hence sort of fast forward, trying to figure out by talking to other passionate people why they chase what they did and how they feel about it. And obviously if they had a similar situation when they were in their 20s and if it led to this dilemma and how they got out of it.
Sure. And then the question is like, what would I do in a crossroad such as that?
Exactly.
And I know, there's I really believe that diversity of people require diversity of approaches. And I think, I'm a type of person, and I'm probably a little bit biased, but I nonetheless would argue that it is useful to have a vision, and that it is useful to spend time in articulating this vision, which is, what is the image, the visual representation of a certain state in the future of, let's say, the economy, let's say my profession, let's say my family. Articulate how you would love, and it's kind of it ought to be a certain shape, a certain kind of way. I think that's very important to have, because that's something that you then kind of can identify with, that you can contrast the present with. And that could also perhaps even explain some of the things that you're lacking. And, I do believe doing it in many spheres of life and separating those spheres is useful as well. Like, what is my vision of friendship? What is my vision of my health? What's my vision of love? What's my vision of the economy? What's my vision on my professional endeavors, my education? There are so many spheres where you can actually articulate a certain, state in the future. Yeah. Let's do it for multiple moments in the future. 2025, 2030, 2050, 2100. I like, I like a lot of the life coaches, the good ones. Tony Robbins, he says this a very, very intelligent thing in my view, that you overestimate what you can do in a short time span, but you underestimate what you can do in a long time span. And if you take 10 years, for sure, you can actually get to your vision, especially if you have a good ability to contrast it with what you have now, where you are standing now, and be honest about it. And then, also identify what's needed to get to that vision. Yeah. And I think it's also true for the economy or for entrepreneurial endeavors. It's the same. And then if you have such a vision for your enterprise, it's like, I believe that an economy should be in balance with human dignity. That, the rights, the unalienable rights to people of, food, shelter, education, health, livable planet, or kind of an environment. That those things are part of an economy in, let's say, 2030, 2050, 2100. We see a huge infringement of that right with our production and consumption systems. What is needed to get there? And then you can say, there's 1,000 things needed, but it's much more interesting to identify what's necessary conditions to get there. That's the interesting thing between necessary and sufficient conditions. If you kind of identify necessary conditions and that you are fierce about, you put everything you have into those necessary conditions, you're on the safe side. You know that your effort won't be in vain. It's really important. It may not be sufficient. You're not claiming it is sufficient, but it's at least something that is worthwhile to pursue. It's the same for your health. It's the same for your, you probably are not kind of exhaustive in the list of things that you have to pursue or the projects that you need to undertake, but take those that you feel like this is necessary and probably have a large effect on that outcome. Be relentless in pursuing that. Now, I think that is a way to perhaps address a little bit the crisis. Although I would say crisis is probably a difference between where you are standing now and where you want to be without having a plan. That's probably a crisis.
Right. That's a nice way to describe it. Yeah.
So it probably doesn't solve your problem. It's more like you have a plan and it's no longer a crisis.
Yeah. One of the things you committed, I guess, to seeing something that is necessary is developing true pricing.
Yeah.
Can you explain for those that don't understand, including myself, what true pricing is And also, I guess, a little bit the backstory of how you came up with this.
Sure. Yeah. So I was, I don't know, 17 or so. When my mom used to get her salary, we call it Sint Salaria. It's kind of Saint Salaria. And we would be able to go to the bakery and choose something out of the bakery because there was some money. And then I would sit in a car and have discussion. I asked my mother, why are we poor? And she said, we are not poor. Look around you. There's so many people who are poor. We are actually doing okay. Stop whining. And I did so. I traveled and I saw indeed there's people who are, poverty is a relative concept. It's relative deep deprivation, right? And you can speak of those who are in extreme forms of poverty, who cannot even assure the basics of livability, of health, right? Mm-hmm. And I saw that when I did these kind of, I decided to create these donations, kind of fundraisers with my high school. I collected 16,500 euros for farmer communities in Ghana, in cocoa farming, who are poor for generations. And maybe it's a bit denigrating to say. I need to be cautious because it's and I learned later it's kind of this neo-colonial interpretation, right? That we say it's poor, but it's according to our standards, and it is also then I associated with lots of inferiority, which is totally misplaced. I've always felt a bit awkward and uncomfortable in that context because we have this legacy of exploitative structures and they're still in place.
I'm smiling because I recognize it from my time in Bali, where it's a similar situation where a lot of people live according to our standards in poverty, but they were some of the happiest people I've ever met. Sure. Where I think we, as you mentioned, we have this assumption that poverty equals unhappiness, sure, which doesn't have to be the case.
Exactly. And also we need to be cautious of romanticizing their financial economic situation. I think it's just unjust, but not necessarily the case that they have some sort of inferiority. And I think we just we should shut the F up about it and just make sure that we, pay our fair share. And that was something I went to university. I started studying and learning about the kind of exploitative regulatory system that we are all part of in trade. And, for example, exporting chocolate bars would be much more expensive for, cooperatives than exporting cooperatives of farmers, than exporting the raw beans. Because, there was kind of a trade agreement with the European Union. And then at the same time, we do these kind of development aid projects. For me, it felt like it's not authentic. Even though I believe in the merit of development cooperation, I felt I was used, and my good intentions would actually lead to legitimizing exploitative structures and in a way reproducing those structures. And I felt part of this kind of exploitative larger system. I felt ashamed. I was part of a think tank. I was selected amongst a group of people to be part of a think tank of key decision makers, former minister president Lubbers in the Netherlands, or former CEOs, senators. They were all part of a group of 50 or so, and they used to give advice to ministers. And this was at the moment where there was a popular rise and the kind of unpoliticized nature back in those days of development, cooperation and sustainability vanished.
Right.
And we decided to find another way in which we could address this question and look into, and I was in a way saddened. We could no longer, for example, write a paper on malnutrition and the need for food security. That was in a way sad because it's such a tricky issue, and we're able to mobilize budgets or kind of policies to address that, or kind of influence that. But at the same time, it was refreshing because we could now look into the market itself and see, with the purchase choices we make as consumers, with the purchase choices you make as companies, how can we make sure that we don't reproduce that exploitation in the first place with the policies we have? How can we make sure that we are coherent, that we have policy coherence. And then suddenly, true pricing entered the room as a concept. And it was for me like, wow, as a kind of meteor, it hit my brain and it couldn't leave it anymore. I was like, I need to make sure with my good friend Adrian de Groot Ruiz. He is my fellow entrepreneur, co-founder, good friend. Also, in those days, we were, doing debating together. We said like, let's, and I remember in a cafe in Amsterdam, I was like, I don't know, early 20s. He said to me, listen, if we want to make this a success, you have to stop so many other things. I was doing a lot of things besides this, like a lot of side hustles, entrepreneurial projects. And I, understood that, well, this is such a global issue. It will require everything and it needs all the dedication. And that was the moment I said like, okay, I will just fully focus on this.
I could imagine that you, when starting that, got a lot of people who said, it's never going to work.
Totally. We had like American entrepreneurs on pitch. One American entrepreneur on a pitching competition. He said, dictating prices would be communism. I'm exaggerating a bit his accent, but when an American person says communism, it's a complete disqualification. Yeah. We had a high-ranking business representative who said, and he was from a retail organization, he said, this is against competition. The competition authority will call it a cartel. You are dictating prices, which, was, wow. But again, it's a big disqualification. We had a professor who said, it's technically impossible. We tried it 20 years ago. He was the most esteemed professor in food in the world, actually, not even the Netherlands. So this really was the beginning. We brought this idea in boardrooms. Obviously, we had a good network to start off with, also relatively well connected globally. But we weren't necessarily taken serious. We started as a foundation because we thought this is kind of a pre-competitive challenge and we need to write the method to calculate what is actually the true price. What is the fair price that those farmers need to get to, alleviate poverty or to kind of have a decent living, including a house, including food, including education, insurances. We thought we need to write that method that needs to have some sort of, foundation to, be seen as authoritative. And if you have a multi-stakeholder foundation, it's kind of, this must fly. It's the biggest challenge that the world has ever seen in at least the economic system. Yeah, but indeed it wasn't possible. It wasn't seen like that.
Where does then the conviction come from that you knew clearly, after hearing it apparently countless times, I'm not going to listen. I'm going to keep going because I know this is true. What was the thing where you're like, no, it's going to work. I just need to find the right people who are like willing to place that bet.
Yeah. Like I believe in some sort of, the laws of physics as a guiding principle for feasibility and also the kind of human nature and, technological advancements. And if you kind of equate different trends, it's an inevitable, it's an inevitable idea. It's inevitable that we will have truer pricing, so to say. Mm-hmm. And with truer pricing, I mean prices that represent better the costs that underlie the production and consumption of products. Yeah. And, so for me, I always try to listen. We may have failed or may have succeeded. I hope we may succeed, and we have succeeded with listening to what is fair critique and what is kind of critique that is in contrast with these kind of human, what is a human and what is kind of the laws of physics or the laws of biology, and what is kind of influencing markets. And so far so good. I mean, we were considered crazy then, and now we are quite, we make quite some waves. Yeah. It's no way near to where we want to be, and I think it's just in the very early days. But a decade down the road, it's we're still standing, and I do think it's more likely than ever that true prices will be the reality.
Has there been any point, because you mentioned 10 years, decade, it speaks for what you said earlier about people willing to think about what you can achieve in the long run.
Yeah.
Was there like one big significant moment where you were very close to quitting? And if so, what made you keep going?
Never.
Never?
No, because, I try to minimize my, the stuff that I am carrying with me. I try to simplify as much as possible. I'm always like, as long as I live, just my physical presence, my brain is working, I will still pursue it. I may have a big kind of loss, or we may have, certain battles may have lost, but we won't lose the larger game. Yeah. So, no, I never necessarily had this kind of existential moment where I said like, let's quit. No, because I just still fix on the vision, and that's super clear. And I spent a lot of time in that, and I just see it in front of me, and the empirical understanding of what, choices in markets, what is foundational to it, how's technology evolving, how is information processed, and what is kind of the likely outcome of markets. And I, as I said, like technological advancements, the information systems are more omnipresent than ever. The cost to kind of get information into transactions are lower than ever, and will be exponentially lower with the advancements of technological kind of with technological advancements.
Yeah.
So it's kind of very likely that true price information will be included or incorporated into transactions.
I have 2 more questions. We have a recurring segment on the show whereby I collected community questions and I put them in a jar, and I'd invite you to take one out, read it out, and then give your opinion on it.
Kind of make it like a lottery. Who will I pick? Okay, Kira Boer. How do you experience failure? Interesting. Shall I just freely interpret this question? Because it's multi-interpretational. For me, failure is, I'm very sensitive to kind of failure. I won't lie. I would love to say like, there's no such thing as failure, but I actually don't believe that. I actually think you can fail. Failing to obviously meet a certain target or goal that you may have set, that is failure for me. I would feel if I have done everything I can, then if I don't meet that goal, it's okay. But if I haven't done everything I could, or if it's something that I can clearly identify as something I was within my control and I didn't live up to that or didn't do that, that's for me a failure. So but I think also many people think that I've obviously quite some pretension. I'm quite a pretentious person with all my ideas and endeavors, and they may feel that I have this, kind of desire to push my ideas onto others, or to kind of uphold some sort of standard, and that I am virtuous myself. And, I want, it's kind of virtual signaling. But I don't really feel that way. I don't really feel that, even though I would really appreciate others if they do, but I don't think they are inferior if they have other idea systems or if they oppose my ideas. I think they're still, probably many of them are coming from a good place. No worries. They have good intentions, and, they are also struggling. And, I think through an honest exchange, through trying to get to know each other, finding each other in what ideas and positions and perspectives we have, we can get to a higher ground. That's how I see that. So, just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, people may think, like how there's this, in Dutch we would say deuger. I'm not someone who wants to be a deuger at all. Right. I feel like I'm failing a lot on many dimensions of in relation to what I want to pursue myself. I'm not completely not consistent, or I have also incoherent choices. and I'm just trying to do my best. And I think it's universal for everyone to have this kind of challenge.
I appreciate that honesty, because I could imagine that in a industry or whatever you want to call it, where people demand, I guess, the best all the time, to admit that you worry about failing or admit about potentially not living up to what you think you are, that I think that's respectable that you're able to admit that.
Sure, yeah, no, and I think like I'm failing constantly, and that's universal. And I also feel, well, yeah, indeed, I struggle with that a lot, and I try to keep myself, sharp on this. Like, and I don't think I'm superior to anyone else, despite their positions. I always see, it's who am I to say fundamentally? Like, I also try, but I also have this. If I would dive deeper in this question of failure, what I would consider a very sad outcome of our movement, the movement of true prices, true profits, kind of making markets more in sync with, well, human rights or, some sort of unalienable forms of dignity on the one hand, and on the other hand, life satisfaction and, flourishing people and flourishing communities globally, is that if we would be used exactly in a contrary way, like this Oppenheimer moment, even though he deliberately apparently was pursuing a bomb that is, very destructive. It's probably the worst things that ever happened to humanity, and it's still extremely, extremely frightening and sick that we have these destructive kind of weapon arsenals globally. But he did feel later in his life like this remorse and sorrow, and he wanted to work on non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. That he used his insights and his talents and the power of understanding the world through physics for a negative outcome to the world. And, for us, I'm very sometimes afraid that, with all our good intentions, we can pave the way to negative outcomes.
Yeah.
That's a big fear that I have. Like, you've put all of the effort in, you wanted to do the good, and it's used for the bad thing.
We have arrived at the last question, and that question is, what does the future hold for Michel? Michel.
Good question. I don't know. It's but if I would dream and say this is what I want in the future, I would say I'm able to have a different healthy organizations: Impact Institute, True Price, Impact Economy Foundation, True Price Foundation, that together make true prices a reality, meaning that every product that's bought in the store, anywhere around the world, reflects the social and environmental costs. There's no poverty involved, there's no exploitation involved, no enslavement, no child labor, there's clean water, air and soil outcomes, there's no contribution to climate change, to biodiversity loss, to land destruction, to destroying forests. It's kind of in balance with nature, and it's fulfilling the needs of people, the aspiration of entrepreneurs, the potential that economies can bring to flourish for communities. That's what we ideally see, and also on the level of companies, that there's kind of the pursuit of truer profits, or we call it impact-weighted accounts, and that you weigh the different interests of stakeholders and the different stocks of value, social, human, natural value, and that is all in balance. That is kind of what I would pursue in the future, and I want.
I appreciate you taking the time today. I know that you're extremely busy. I've been fascinated listening to you. I feel like I have so much to process after the fact still. But thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Likewise. Thank you so much for your time and with your exciting endeavor. Really appreciate it.